Thank you very much, Professor Pillai. I have a small little presentation. Let me first tell you that for the last 2 days, we have had a lot of deliberations on digital learning, online learning, and different modes of learning, as you may call it. In my opinion, perhaps the biggest problem is that we are still talking about these modes of learning as independent units. Perhaps the biggest mistake that we are doing is that we are compartmentalizing these modes of learning, and we are not allowing it horizontally to integrate. Whether it be face-to-face education, whether it is online education, whether it is distance education, or various modes of education which are coming in, has to be experimented within the classroom. A very pertinent question was asked in the last session, that how are you going to bring in a semblance of acceptability to the distance education or online education or digital education, you may call it. Because what is happening in India presently, what I see, that one part of this educational or learning pyramid is pulling down the other part. And therefore, neither the face-to-face education nor the distance education or the online education is flourishing. Every time I have been in Punjab Technical University, Professor Arora is there, and we also face this kind of fright, a fear, that perhaps distance education is taking a lot of students out of the face-to-face education, which is not exactly true. And then people would always come out and tell you that in distance education there are no classes, and therefore that is not a very credible system of education. The problem, in my opinion, is that even in face-to-face education, at least 30% of the students attend less than 30% of the classes. And all these technical universities are giving them degrees. So I don't think it is a real fear. It is all in the mindset. And therefore, when I started thinking about preparing for this particular session, I made out a few things as my leading questions or leading thoughts of how to prepare for the future. Perhaps our future must be decided about based on the national needs, the critical shifts that we are seeing, the rapid change in technology, the intense competition that we are facing in higher education, and growing regulatory pressures. Believe me, a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about has already been covered, and therefore I would not be spending much time on this. The shift that we see is that Government of India is also trying to bring in a semblance of order to the higher education system, because everybody is feeling that there is a basic problem of quality which has come into the system. And therefore, only those who would follow the quality parameters would thrive and succeed. Others would perhaps struggle and die down. The biggest thing that we all must realize, whether in the education sector or in the education industry or in the knowledge economy, is that whatever has been the paradigm in the 20th century is perhaps going to change very drastically. The national need that is going to come out of is due to various sectors of people who are going to join in the higher education system, whether it is rural or people who are not able to afford higher education now. Hyderabad or Andhra Pradesh, in fact, is very fortunate because there is a cap on the fee, 30,000 rupees for the engineering state-sponsored seats. But in most of the other states, it is more than 1 lakh. And therefore, there are large number of students who are not able to afford higher education. They are non-traditional students. There are very limited space. Foreign universities today or tomorrow are going to come. And therefore, in this space where the demand has already outpaced the supply, there is a problem of, the supply has already outpaced the demand. There is a problem of limited space where competition is very large. And then there is a problem of rising expectations. Jobs, Professor Arora said, everybody needs that, would you assure me a job? And that is another. The critical shift that we have already talked about in the past 2 days is the urban versus rural divide. The part-time learners are coming into. I see a shift. Students who were earlier going towards the technical education system are getting disenchanted very fast, and they are slowly going towards the sciences streams again. More than 40% of the seats in technical education is vacant in almost all these states in the north. I don't know about the south, but this is a reality. Future growth will continue to be driven by non-traditional students. The impact of the shift is primarily because the students who you guys, the educational institutions are taking from a school system of education, which is primarily producing students who are unprepared for the kind of technical education, quality technical education that we are providing. Leave aside Professor Sangal's past organization, that is IITs or the IIMs. But most of the sector of educational institutions that we are talking about is in that bracket where the students who are unprepared are coming to technical education. Facebook generation students, learners, we have already talked about yesterday, and we need to create very tailored programs for adult education. And therefore, any approach that we talk about today cannot be the only approach that is going to in fact succeed. The rapid change in technology we are seeing, because such a congregation at a platform of digital learning was totally unheard of 5 years ago. So if we all are working towards this, then there has to be a mechanism by which we can integrate more of these conventional universities into this system. Because that I see is absent from this platform. We will have to work on the innovations that we are talking about today. The impact of Web 2 technologies, a lot of people have talked about, and therefore I'm not going to touch on it. But all these experimentations will have to get into the classroom. The technology impact, I've already talked it. What I'm going to compare is what I foresee is going to happen in India 5 years hence. Because what we see in US is what I expect is slowly going to infiltrate into the Indian economy as well. And what has happened is that from 2000 to 2008, online enrollment in the US has grew at a rate of 19%. By fall 2008, 25.3% of all higher education students took at least one online course. Growing acceptance of online education as good or better than F2F only because they have integrated both the two. In California, there is a law that on the grade card, you cannot put how the student has taken a particular course. And therefore, you are not producing a bias by how the student is taking a course. That law has to come into India. If that law doesn't come, we will all be fighting for a space which is totally dissociated from the so-called credible space or the face-to-face education. By 2020, half of all learning may be online in the US. The competitive pressures that we are facing in higher education is because of the supply has actually outpaced demand. Again, the competition in the US tells me that private for-profit institutions have grown almost 340% in the US in the online segment, compared to only 59% growth in the public sector and about 49% growth in the not-for-profit private sector. And therefore, this is an inkling of what might happen if we try to experiment it a little further. By 2009, for-profits owned 42% of the US online segment. And that is exactly what is happening in India as well. Regulatory pressures in higher education will be driven by the cost and accountability. You cannot and you would not be able to charge the money that you are charging because of the pressures on the number of seats. And higher education will need to take charge of these issues. So in a sense, the imperatives for growth, in my opinion, is that they make their students within the classroom learn at their own pace, draw from a broader geographic base. The non-traditional students must be integrated into the system. The students should be allowed or should be given that kind of flexibility where they can take employment along with the courses that they are taking, and encourage students to use latest technologies by working in virtual teams across classrooms, across geographic boundaries, and across nations. And integrate. The most important point that I'm trying to make is that integrate face-to-face with changing learning